Two bakery workers died in agony after being sent into a giant bagel oven to carry out repairs. The repair was a delicate procedure that involved crawling through a tight 75-foot-long conveyor belt that slowly cooks bagels. The machine should have been left to cool for 12 hours, but turned back on after only 2. Within 5 minutes, the men were relaying terrifying messages over their walkie-talkies, saying the oven's core was way too hot. But there was no way of reversing the conveyor belt, and they were trapped on its journey through the oven. 44-year-old Ian Erickson managed to crawl out the other end, but died on the factory floor in front of horrified workmates. 47-year-old David Mays collapsed inside and was caught in the machinery. He died from 80% burns and multiple broken bones. A 42-year-old Russian fisherman was viciously attacked by a bear in 2014, but he was saved when the ringtone his granddaughter installed on his iPhone suddenly went off. Justin Bieber's song Baby miraculously sent the bear running back into the woods. In 1963, Rodney Fox was spearfishing off the coast of Australia when something suddenly pulled him under. Within seconds, Fox was suffering from a punctured lung, ripped diaphragm, pierced scapula, and an exposed rib cage, abdomen, and spleen. After pulling him up from the water, rescuers had to keep his wetsuit on to prevent his organs from spilling out. After 4 hours of surgery and 462 stitches, Rodney Fox lived to tell the tale of surviving one of the worst great white shark attacks in recorded history. A grieving mother from Florida added a sandbox to the gravesite of her baby boy so that her older son could play with him. Forced standing was a barbaric form of treatment that was believed to be a cure for insanity in the 19th century. The mental patient would be forced to stand in a compact cell for days at a time with very limited food, water, and outside contact. This is a real photo of a patient enduring this treatment at a Texas mental institution in 1890. In 1977, the University of Evansville men's basketball team was involved in a tragic plane crash. The crash killed every player on the team, except for one man who didn't make the trip due to an injury. 2 weeks later, the only remaining player was killed by a drunk driver. A 19-year-old girl named Olga was camping with her stepfather in Russia when a mother brown bear attacked them. After the bear broke her stepfather's neck and smashed his skull, Olga attempted to flee. But the bear chased her down and soon grabbed her by the legs and started mauling her. Olga then managed to make 3 phone calls to her mother while being eaten alive by the bear and her 3 cubs. In the first phone call, she screamed, "Mom, the bear is eating me. Mom, it's such agony. Mom, help." At first, her mother thought it was a joke, but soon heard the true horror in her daughter's voice and the sound of bears growling and chewing. But she could only helplessly listen in horror to her daughter's screams for mercy. Nearly an hour later, the bears had left her, but Olga knew she was gonna die. She said, "Mom, I don't feel the pain anymore. Forgive me for everything. I love you so much." A South African man named Martin Pistorius lived through an actual nightmare. When he was 12 years old, Martin got sick and fell into a coma where he remained in a vegetative state for 12 years. Or at least, doctors thought it was a vegetative state. Because 2 years into the coma, Martin regained consciousness, but was unable to show any sign of it. So he was trapped in a lifeless state for an entire decade while being fully aware of everything going on around him. He said one of the worst parts was when the daycare lady would sit him in front of children and baby TV shows all day long. On multiple occasions, he also heard his mother say, "I hope you die." Today, Martin can speak through a computer and move with a wheelchair, as his awareness has fully returned. When 13-year-old Ryan White got AIDS from a blood donor in 1984, he was only given 6 months to live. Even though doctors said he posed no risk to other students, he was banned from returning to school by a petition signed by 117 parents. An auction was even held to raise funds to keep him out, and a local newspaper that supported him received death threats. The family was forced to leave town when a bullet was shot through the window of their home. Ryan outlived the doctor's diagnosis by 5 years, dying at the age of 19. Frank Goldsmith was a Titanic survivor who later lived near Tiger Stadium in Detroit. But he said he never took his children to a ball game because the roar of the crowd reminded him of the screams of people dying in the freezing waters. When Robin Williams met Coco the gorilla for the first time in 2001, he made her smile for the first time in 6 months. When Robin died in 2014, Coco overheard the news and said the word cry in sign language. A girl who grew up in a concentration camp drew this when she was asked to draw a picture of home in 1948. The deacon St. Lawrence was roasted alive on a giant grill during the persecution of Valerian in 258 AD. As he was being executed, he joked with his tormentors, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." Today, he is the patron saint of chefs, firefighters, and comedians. Young filmmaker Lee Halpin was filming a documentary about the hardships of being homeless by living as one. But he was found dead in the streets only 3 days into filming. The nuclear blast in Hiroshima was so powerful that some people were vaporized instantly, leaving only shadow imprints of their final moments. After an accident at the Tokemura nuclear plant in 1999, nuclear technician Hisashi Ouchi received a fatal dose of radiation. The dose was believed to be nearly equivalent to the energy produced at the hypocenter of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Ouchi's exposure to the radiation was so severe that his chromosomes were basically melted and his white blood cell count plummeted to near zero. Unfortunately for Ouchi, doctors saw this as an opportunity to see how long they could keep him alive. They gave him revolutionary cancer treatment, as well as many skin grafts and blood transfusions. On the 59th day, he suffered 3 heart attacks in under an hour. The treatment went on for 83 days total, until Ouchi finally died from organ failure. Jake Thompson was home alone when he had both of his arms ripped off in a farming accident. However, he still managed to get up and dial 911 with a pencil in his mouth. He miraculously survived and both of his arms were reattached. For centuries, there was a paint pigment called mummy brown that was made out of the ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. The color was manufactured until 1964, when the supply of ancient mummies was finally expended. This is a photo of 2 engineers embracing for one final hug while standing on top of a wind turbine engulfed in flames. One of the men jumped to escape the fire, while the other one was burned alive while attempting to reach the staircase. Seth MacFarlane and Mark Wahlberg were both booked to fly on American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center on 9/11. Wahlberg decided last minute to fly to Toronto instead, while MacFarlane missed the flight by 10 minutes due to a hangover. Both have said they've had countless dreams of the scenario in which they got on that plane. During the Holocaust, famous Jewish boxer Salomo Aruch was forced to fight fellow prisoners at Auschwitz. It was merely for the entertainment of Nazi officers, and the losers would be sent to the gas chambers. Aruch survived over 200 fights over a 2-year span and was freed when the camp was liberated. An Indian farmer named Sanju Bhagat lived for 36 years looking like he was pregnant. But one day he was rushed to the hospital because he was having trouble breathing. Doctors initially assumed that a tumor was growing inside his abdomen, but upon operating, they saw something that they had never seen before. They realized that he must have absorbed his twin in the womb and had been carrying it around for 36 years. This is an extremely rare condition called fetus in fetu, where one twin has been absorbed but continues to leach on the host's blood supply and nutrition. The fetus had grown teeth, hair, limbs, and even genitalia. The parasitic twin was eventually removed and Sanju made a full recovery. This is what the end of a species looks like. A keeper in Sudan says goodbye to the last male white rhino in the world, 2018. This is the last photo ever taken of American freediver Nicholas Mavoli. He was attempting to freedive 236 feet deep. He completed the dive, surfaced, gave the OK sign, tried to speak, and then he passed out. He never regained consciousness and died later that day to pulmonary edema. These are the stomach contents of a psychiatric patient who died with pica disorder. It is a disease characterized by a heightened appetite for inedible objects. Oftentimes, patients with pica disorder would be permanently placed in completely empty rooms without any of their clothes. Otherwise, they would eat them. Mount Everest has hundreds of bodies of dead climbers on it, which now serve as trail markers to the top. It is considered the world's largest open-air graveyard. Some were lucky enough to die in their sleep, while others suffered injuries from falls and slowly died to hypothermia. After being shot in the forehead by a drunk man and enduring an 8-year coma, policeman Gary Dockery suddenly woke up. He started talking enthusiastically, recognizing old friends and recalling events from past years. But by the very next day, he could no longer speak, and he slipped back into the same coma and never woke up again. In the 1980s, a family owned and operated a ceramics factory in California called Oscar Ceramics. But in 1987, the factory was revealed to be an illegal crematorium. This was only uncovered when a passerby, who happened to be a Holocaust survivor, recognized the smell of burning bodies from his time at Auschwitz. In 1880, the Queen of Thailand's boat capsized on the way to her palace. Despite many witnesses, nobody dared to save the drowning queen and her daughter. This was because touching the queen under any circumstances was a crime punishable by death. The lowest form of accommodation in Victorian England was a place where you could dangle on a rope overnight for the price of a penny. For centuries, the feet of Chinese women were tightly bound from a young age as part of a traditional custom, causing the breaking and bending of the bones of the toe. This resulted in extremely disfigured feet that resembled the hooves of animals. The first firefighter to die on 9/11 was a 37-year-old man named Daniel Sir. He was killed when a woman jumped from one of the towers and landed on top of him. Founder of CNN, Ted Turner, has a video scheduled to be broadcasted if the end of the world is ever upon us. In 1978, Charlie Chaplin's body was stolen and held for ransom, but his widow refused to pay ransom demands of 400,000 euros because she said Charlie would have thought it to be ridiculous. His body was found in a cornfield 11 weeks later, and the two suspects were apprehended. A woman in Florida once spent 6 straight years sitting on a couch. She died during a surgery that attempted to remove her skin that was grafted into the fabric. Frank Hayes was a jockey who suffered a fatal heart attack and died in the middle of a horse race in 1923. His body, however, remained on the saddle throughout the race, as his horse Sweet Kiss crossed the finish line ahead of the rest, thus winning the race. This was the first time Hayes had ever won a race, and the last. There are currently hundreds of deceased people in the US whose bodies are frozen in liquid nitrogen, including baseball legend Ted Williams. The hope is that future technology will be able to revive them one day. While this could possibly work, cryogenic freezing has proven to be a terribly risky operation. In one instance, the Cryonics Society of California ran out of money and couldn't keep their customers frozen, so the bodies began to thaw and decompose. Some of the bodies even went missing, and to this day, their families still don't know what happened to them. Famous Austrian composer and painter Arnold Schoenberg had triskaidekaphobia, aka a fear of the number 13. He feared the number so much that he called it 12A instead of 13. For years he was terrified that he would die on Friday the 13th when he was 76, since 7 plus 6 equals 13. In fact, he was so scared of that day that he stayed in bed all night until he essentially scared himself to death. He died of a heart attack just minutes before midnight. As per his request, the creator of Pringles had his ashes stored in a Pringles can when he died. 18 months after colon surgery, an Australian woman returned to the hospital when she was experiencing severe stomach pain. Apparently, the surgeons had accidentally left their scissors inside of her abdomen. After being diagnosed with polio at age 3, Diane Odell spent nearly 60 years encased in a 750-pound iron lung. She only died when a power outage shut down the machine that had been keeping her alive for decades. Do you know why you wake up right before you're about to die in a dream? It's because your brain doesn't know what it's actually like to experience death. In 1901, Madame Bobbin from England fell ill late into her pregnancy and was pronounced dead. But a few days later, one of the nurses was tormented by the idea that she may have been buried alive. After Madame Bobbin's father was alerted of this, he demanded that the grave be dug up immediately. When the coffin was open, he was horrified to find the corpse of a baby with an uncut umbilical cord laying between his now dead daughter's legs. This photo shows the dramatic differences between two boys who were exposed to the same smallpox source in 1901. One of them was vaccinated, the other one was not. These punishing shoes were a type of medieval torture device. The victim would have to stand on their tippy toes for as long as they could before falling back and having rusty spikes jammed into their heel. Artist William Udermolen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 1995. Over the next 5 years, he drew these self-portraits of himself which displayed the devastating effects of the disease. The Station nightclub fire in Rhode Island was a terrible tragedy that killed 100 people in 2003. But a man named Mike Vargas managed to survive for more than 90 minutes inside the building. He was trampled by a mob trying to escape and only survived because he was insulated by all the bodies burning around him. He walked out with only minor burns on his legs but still suffers from severe PTSD to this day. In 2015, a Texas father saved his son's life when doctors wrongly declared him brain dead and wanted to take him off life support. He barricaded himself inside the hospital room with a gun and had a 3-hour standoff with a SWAT team until his son squeezed his hand. The son eventually made a full recovery. In 1985, a 13-year-old Colombian girl was trapped up to her waist in volcanic mud flow. She was mostly alert and was interviewed, but rescuers couldn't find a way to save her. Knowing she would certainly die, volunteers did their best to comfort her. She died after 60 hours, and her image became iconic. In 2008, a Brazilian priest strapped 1,000 balloons onto a lawn chair and rode it into the sky as part of a fundraiser. He was able to reach an altitude of 20,000 feet before losing contact with authorities. Over a month later, the lower half of his body was found floating near an oil rig. If you're a woman who is either very young, very old, rich, poor, stubborn, hangs out with other women, has ever been in an argument, has too many children, has a birthmark, or has had milk turn sour in your fridge, you would qualify as a witch in 1692 Salem and would promptly be executed. Some tumors can contain pockets of hair and teeth, and more rarely, some can even grow more complex organs like eyes, hands, and feet. Polish teenager Iga Jasica unexpectedly woke up in the middle of her brain surgery and calmly asked the doctor, "How's it going?" But she wasn't in any pain, so they talked about cats until the surgery was completed. After 9/11, the rescue dogs searching in the rubble started to become depressed because they weren't finding any live bodies. Rescue workers started to bury themselves in the debris to trick the dogs into thinking they were saving people. It is estimated that just over 100 billion people have died on the planet to date. In 1971, high school student Juliana Kopka was sucked out of an airplane after it was struck by lightning. She fell nearly 10,000 feet still strapped to her chair and lived, only to endure an 11-day walk through the Amazon rainforest to the nearest civilization. She was eventually rescued by some local lumbermen and ended up being the sole survivor of the plane crash. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi was competing in a 145-mile endurance event through the Sahara Desert. During the race, a sandstorm disoriented Prosperi, causing him to run nearly 200 miles in the wrong direction. He soon found himself completely stranded in the middle of the desert without any resources. After a few days of suffering, he decided to slit his own wrists, attempting to die a less painful death. But he was so dehydrated that his thick blood clotted up the wounds and he woke up the next day. 9 days later, he was rescued in a completely different country after losing 40 pounds of body weight. He survived off of insects, cactuses, his own urine, bats, snakes, and wet wipes. Tom and Eileen Longergan were a young couple from Louisiana on a vacation in the Coral Sea off the coast of Australia. They were scuba diving with a large group in the open ocean and were accidentally left behind. By the time someone realized they were missing, it was too late, and the couple was never found. This is a series of cat paintings by famous artist Louis Wayne from the early 1900s. They capture a slow descent into the varying levels of his schizophrenic episodes. After watching a documentary about women being tortured and killed in a basement, Katrina McGaw realized she was actually living in the same apartment. The traditional last meal for inmates on death row did not begin as a final compassionate act for them. It was otherwise an attempt to bribe their ghosts to not haunt the executioners. Nicknamed the Russian Bird Boy, Vanya Yudin was kept isolated by his mother in a room full of birds in cages. When he was rescued in 2008 at the age of 7, he could only communicate by chirping and flapping his arms. Frankie Muniz has had 9 concussions throughout his life and now suffers from severe memory loss. His condition is so bad that he doesn't even remember being on the TV show Malcolm in the Middle. According to ancient beliefs, birthmarks show how you were killed in your past life. A man named Michael Paul was on his way home from church when he decided to casually crack his neck like any other time. But afterwards, he suddenly started sweating profusely and then went pale. By the time Paul could receive medical care, he had already slipped into a coma. Soon afterwards, Michael Paul had died from cracking his neck. Morbid Facts, Part 51. In 2013, a Nigerian chef survived in a sunken ship for nearly 3 days. It was 270 feet deep in pitch black water, and he said the only thing he could hear was the sound of fish eating the corpses of his shipmates. In 1998, 2-year-old Harrison Johnson was stung 432 times after disturbing a yellow jacket's nest in Tampa, Florida. Harrison's parents asked for neighborhood children and local church members to pray for him. But they didn't call for medical help until he stopped breathing more than 7 hours later. The parents belong to a religion that looks down on hospitals because they believe that doctors practice witchcraft. Doctors say the little boy could have been saved, but likely died an exquisitely painful death as a result of his parents' negligence. Michael Jackson avoided tragedy on 9/11 thanks to his mother. He had a meeting at the top of one of the towers that morning, but missed his appointment because he overslept. The night before, he had been up late talking to his mom on the phone until 3 a.m. In France, you can legally marry a dead person as long as you can prove that they planned on marrying you before they died. On June 11, 2019, Illinois teenager Riley Horner was accidentally kicked in the head. As a result of the injury, her memory resets every 2 hours and she wakes up every day thinking it's June 11th.